So a part of any trip, I think, is sort of authorization to travel. And we'd gotten our carnet de passages in Europe and so on, and came into Morocco.
Also known as visas.
And traveled around. And well, the carnet is for the vehicle. And and our visas were also, of course, an issue. Got into Morocco and realized that we had this whole world of officialdom that we had to somehow negotiate. And we went to the embassy in Rabat, and we had itemized all of our equipment, and they put a seal on it. It was completely unofficial and illegal, but we had this listing that we would show to people as we crossed borders. And it looked so official, and it had the stamp of the United States and ribbons and all this stuff. So we were then traveling. We had traveled around Morocco, as indicated, and just had this marvelous time. Morocco is quite a remarkable country. And then wanted to cross the desert to get into the East African wildlife and so on, the trip that we had envisaged. And so we're going to cross, and we asked the embassy, and they said, well, yes, there's this route that goes to Colombia and and so on. So we thought that we'd take it, and so we got authorization to cross from. There was no formal border crossing from a local traditional chief of some kind, and we asked him if we could cross, and he said, yes, well, please cross at your pleasure. And so we crossed at that area, and one of the first things that we ran into was a military Austin vehicle that had hit a landmine, and somebody had written on the back of it, presumably in blood, it was red, I don't know. And we realized that our welcome to Algeria was less warming than it might otherwise have been. And then Dee can take over from.
Okay, let me tell what happened once we got into Algeria. The first major town when you cross from Morocco into Algeria, that's the jumping off spot for then going south across the Sahara Desert through southern Algeria into Mali. And Colombia was a pretty good sized city because it was the outfitting place. So that's where we had to make sure we had sufficient gasoline, sufficient water, sufficient food, and so forth for the crossing and so forth. But you also had to get permission there to go across the desert because they didn't want just people taking off willy-nilly because it'd be dangerous, then have to go out and send people after them. Well, the way they wanted people to cross was to go in caravans. And what they told us was, hey, we have a caravan getting ready to go in, I forget, 2 or 3 days or 4 or 5 days, whatever it was, and you should go with them. Well, we thought about that and thought that maybe the last thing we wanted was to be eating the dust from all these lorries and these big trucks crossing the Sahara ahead of us. So we tried to think of some way we could not have to travel with that convoy. So we finally went back to the prefecture and the head captain, whoever it was, and said, hey, we really appreciate your offering to let us go with that convoy, but we're a scientific expedition. We're collecting data on the environment and the land and animals and plants and stuff we find along the way. So we're going to have to be going stop, and that's really going to be inconvenient for the convoy. So what we would like to do is leave ahead of them, maybe about 4 or 5 days ahead of them. Then if we have any trouble, that's what they were worried about. If we have any trouble, the convoy will be coming along behind us, and they can see us and we can help us out or do whatever we need to do. So we would like to request permission to go on ahead by ourselves. And we had no idea whether we were going to get permission based on that, which was half fabrication, half not. But they did. I think probably the thing was, hey, listen, if you guys are stupid enough to go out there by yourselves, go ahead and have at it. So we said, thank you very much, we're on our way. And so we got all our supplies and water and gasoline and stuff and took off, sort of headed south through across the Sahara. But that was how we were able to travel across the Sahara without having to eat the dust of a convoy.
Before being given authorization, so on, after this incident with the landmines and so on, we were sort of taken up to a military encampment, and they were treating us very well. They gave us Fanta and antelope stew, and just trying to figure out who we were, and this is where the whole caravan issue and so on enters, what our objectives were, and why we should be welcomed into the desert. And so, being a geographer, I, of course, thought of the Sahara Desert as anyone thinks of the Sahara Desert, this incredible wasteland and so on. I just experienced, we had gone up to Tiziantijka, and but this is the high Atlas Mountains, and there was hail, and there's rain, and it was cold, and so on, and this is summer. And then we went down from Kolombi Shar into the desert, and one of the first things to greet us was a hailstorm. This just cloud cover and hail and so on, and I thought that maybe we have to sort of revise our thinking of this adventure, that we're encountering weather and so on that is quite different. And we were traveling over to the southern reaches of the desert, and we had chosen a route. It's called the Tanzarof route. It's the less well taken. There are three major routes. One is coastal, and then the Tanzarof comes down to the sort of west central, and then the Hoga route, which is the more common one. But what was interesting about this was one would see then burned out Volkswagen buses or something, and it was because people would carry their jerry cans very often in their vehicles, and there'd be vapors, and they'd light up a cigarette or something and blow up. And then would find it was difficult to know sort of our route. There are these bidons, these sort of markers along the routes, and very often you'd follow them, and you'd come to a place where there were rocks and a pool of oil, and you realize that this is more strategically more complicated in traveling across the desert than we otherwise would imagine. But one of the other features of it was how well people kept track of each other, and how if we would be stopped and a truck were traveling across the desert, they'd always come over to check and be sure that everything was okay, and if we needed anything. But it was the crossing was interesting, and it took a bit of a toll on the Land Rover, but it was really quite wonderful.
One of the adventures we had when we were crossing the Sahara came at the end of the first day. What you do when you're driving across the Sahara is you don't drive on a road. There are no roads as such, at least not paved in that sense. At least once you get south a little bit, there are a lot of sand dunes in the northern part of the Sahara Desert, and lovely things once you get through those. Then it's more or less flat. But the way they do it is the Sahara has a sort of a salt crust along the top of it that helps vehicles, because when you're driving along on that crust, it's a little harder and gives you a little better traction. But once a vehicle has driven on that crust, it breaks the crust, and then the path, the ground where that tire went is now soft sand. And so what you do when you're driving is you got all these tracks that are more or less going south, more or less in the same general route, but you just keep driving to the edge of those tracks that previous vehicles have gone where they broke the crust. So you're driving on this crust with no roads, kind of keeping track of where the tire marks from early vehicles gone. But then, as Jeff had mentioned, there There are barrels every 2 kilometers, I think, or something like that, with sand in them to position them. And the idea is what you want to do is, as you're driving south, make sure you keep seeing those barrels, because that's the marker of the basic route. So as long as you keep seeing those barrels, you're on track, you're en route. So we were driving along the first day. Of course, it's hot. It was in early fall of 1964. Very warm. So we started talking about that. Well, it's warm weather. Maybe it would be a neat idea to travel during the night when it cools off a whole bunch. So we all thought about it, talked about it, and finally said, yeah, let's keep doing it. So all we have to do is make sure we keep seeing those barrels. So we drove. It got dark, and then got really dark. And then all of a sudden, we didn't see the barrels. Problem. So we drove a little bit further, still didn't see the barrels. So we knew we were off track somehow. Got off the route without meaning to. So what we decided to do was just stop. So let's give up the idea of traveling through the night, because we didn't know if we were heading in the right direction to go on further south. So we stopped, camped, got up in the morning, and then what we had to do was go into search procedure to see if we could find those barrels again. So what we did was start with where we were and kind of started driving in ever widening circles around where we started, just basically a wide circle, but making it bigger and bigger till we got further and further away from where we started, until we finally saw a barrel. Then we knew that's where the basic route was. Then we could head south. We knew where that was. And then once we did that, we were on track, and then we started seeing the barrels again and moved on our way through Algeria and into Mali and eventually Timbuktu, another story. But that was a little eerie, spending the night on the middle of the Sahara Desert by yourself, that is without a convoy, knowing you had missed the route and you were off route here. But the search procedure worked, and we got back on track in good shape. So here we are, driving across the Sahara Desert, headed south from Algeria into Mali. Once we had crossed the border into Mali, the first big town that we came to was a town that we've all heard of for decades and decades in the Western world, the city of Timbuktu. The place, if you've been to Timbuktu, you've been out in the wild, distant places. Well, we came to Timbuktu, and very interesting city. But we were fortunate because we just happened to get there when we didn't know this was coming. We just found out because we decided to spend a day or a couple days there. Timbuktu is located right on a river, the Niger River, right?
Niger.
Yeah. And this is a river you have a rainy season, a dry season, and when the rains come, the river comes up, and when the river comes up, the boat traffic, the river comes up enough that there's significant sized boats that come up that do trading with people and goods and all kind of stuff. Well, we happened to be there when the first boat of the season came in to Timbuktu. So we got to witness that, and we have pictures on our website of all of that. So people from the town just congregated down at the river, and we went down, of course, took the pictures, watching it all over, and watched what they were unloading, both, like I say, people, cargo, things to sell, and so forth. And it was just such an interesting mixture of people, because this is the border, the southern edge of the Sahara now, and then we're starting to get grasslands as you go further south. And so you had a mixture of the dark-skinned sub-Saharan African side by side with the nomadic, more Arabic-looking, Semitic-looking Tuareg types. They were the traders that rode camels across the Sahara Desert, wore these blue tunics and white turbans on their head. And all of these different ethnic types and people types were mixing and mingling and all kind of things. So a very, very rich kind of event. That was kind of the big thing. I'll let Jeff tell you some more about Timbuktu, but when we got there, we just lucked out and hit this first arrival of the boat of the season.
Yeah, and coming down to Timbuktu, and again, as Dee has mentioned, it's really a storied city, and with the discovery of Kaye and other explorers and so on that had visited the city, and many of them didn't leave with their stories. They were killed in the area. And it was one of the sort of the stepping off points for the trans-Saharan trade, and so a part of the mystery was really related to the economics, the importance of economic ambiguity in a sense. But it was a remarkable city.